As the state's leading property and casualty insurance trade association, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance plays a crucial role in safeguarding Wisconsinites. Alliance members provide vital insurance coverage, ensuring financial protection for individuals, businesses, and communities across the state. In times of need, they act as a reliable resource, helping residents recover from unforeseen events. Ultimately, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance and its members contribute to the resilience and well-being of Wisconsin families and businesses by offering essential protection and support. WisI video of the WisPolitics Madison Luncheon series at the Madison Club is made possible with sponsorship support from the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance.
Okay, everyone. All right, welcome to the WisPolitics Luncheon for April at the Madison Club. Thanks very much. I want to thank our sponsors for this series at the Madison Club. Couldn't do it without you. Hush Blackwell Strategies, been with us since the beginning under a couple different names, but thank you. Really appreciate it. American Family Insurance, Xcel Energy, Walmart, ARP Wisconsin, and Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. So thanks very much, all the sponsors. Give them a round of applause. Come on. Okay, our next luncheon, mark your calendars, here at the Madison Club, May 16th, with Greta Neubauer, who's the Assembly Minority Leader, who hopes to be the Assembly Speaker coming up. And so we'll talk to her about redistricting and all of the ins and outs of the election, and review the session also. But today, we have the two chairs of the two major parties in the state of Wisconsin. Please welcome Brian Schimming and Ben Wikler. Look at how friendly they are. Look at that. How friendly. You know, this in the spirit of bipartisanship. You know, people always say people don't get along anymore. And then I say, well, I have the chairs of the parties and sometimes, and look at that. So you guys get along okay, right? Use your mic.
Yeah, we can agree without being disagreeable.
Yeah.
And then
we get along fine. It's you that I'm worried about. We'll see how it goes. I've only known him for like 40 years. So
Okay, I promise not to dredge up all those memories. Although I might ask you to do your Tommy Thompson impersonation or your David Prosser impersonation.
Let's wait till the day after Election Day for that, if we could.
All right. Okay, so I want to, I guess, news of the day. Trump is coming back to the state in an interlude in his trial in New York. I don't know how we're going to... I'm not sure what the topic of the event in Waukesha will be, but anyway, he's coming on Wednesday, May 1.
Yep.
And then, Ben, I wanted to ask you first about visits to the state. When Hillary Rodham Clinton lost here, I think we all noted that she hadn't visited Wisconsin as part of her campaign. I think Biden and Harris have gotten the message.
President Biden's been here 7 times, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Chair Schimming, for what I'm sure will be a productive conversation and a frank exchange of views. And thanks, Jeff, for bringing us all together. The president's been here 7 times since the midterm elections. The vice president was just here, I believe, for her 4th visit this past Monday. We have a constant stream of senior leaders in the administration. And Trump made his first appearance in Wisconsin since his handpicked gubernatorial candidate lost in the midterms on April 2nd. He came. And that night, it really reinforced my view. So that night, he came to Green Bay and told his supporters to vote. He also told them to wait in line for a long time, which, fair enough. But on that night, the Democratic-supported candidates took the majority on the Green Bay City Council, went from evenly split to a 7-5 progressive majority by 15 votes. So my view is the more visits, the better. I think Democrats do better when voters hear President Biden's message, and I think Democrats do much better when they hear President Trump's message. So I want to encourage both of them to spend as much time in our state as possible.
Well, you're right, Jeff. So President Biden, Kamala Harris, I'm sorry, I meant to say Vice President Harris, 11 times between them. And it has had the exact same effect in the polling as Hillary Clinton never showing up once. So their emphasis on the state is not because they're confident in Wisconsin. It's because they know they're in trouble in Wisconsin. There's no doubt about that. And so and remember, the situation with Hillary was Russ Feingold, who many of us know, was on the ballot, and he was desperately calling them to send Hillary in, not only to help herself, but to help Russ out in his second failing Senate race against Ron Johnson. So I don't mind having Joe Biden and Kamala Harris here. I don't see it as a one-for-one, and of course, President Trump will be in next Wednesday. But I don't necessarily see it as a one-for-one because the Biden-Harris ticket are on a rescue mission to Wisconsin because their polling is underwater here, and more importantly, historically, they're polling on almost every major kitchen table issue that move independents in this state is underwater, and it's not close.
All right, Ben, how do you explain the soft, that's a charitable word, soft polling for Biden?
Well, I'd say this is Wisconsin. We're the land of the nail biter. 4 of the last 6 presidential elections have come down to less than 1 percentage point. And if you look at the polling, it's tied again. It is dead even. We also know that the more people know about what President Biden has done in office and plans to do, the more they move towards Democrats, and the more they find out what Donald Trump is promising to do to Americans if he wins again, the more voters move towards Democrats. So when President Biden comes and talks about bringing down prescription drug costs, taking on big pharma, taking on junk fees, working to make sure that regular folks are able to form a union and bargain for better wages and working conditions, those things move folks towards Democrats. And when Trump comes to Wisconsin and promises to be a dictator on day one and exact vengeance against his enemies and brags about overturning Roe versus Wade, that also moves independents towards Democrats and unites Democrats to make sure that he's defeated. So this is, the closer we get to the election, the more focused people will be on the choice and the kind of future that they live in. And what we've already seen is Democrats doing better. In the spring elections on April 2nd, we won 63% of the races that we were engaged in. And we're seeing an enormous amount of energy from grassroots activists, people knocking on doors. There's a really clear contrast between these two different futures. And I think most Americans, most Wisconsinites, want the future that President Biden and Vice President Harris have to offer.
Okay, so both of you have something else in common other than being chairs of the major parties. Both of you have candidates who have problems within the party. So, you know, when Trump is on the ballot, Nikki Haley is still scoring double digits in there was a primary in Pennsylvania this week, and the same thing happened in Wisconsin. And Uninstructed has been polling double digits in many Midwestern states. Shouldn't we be past? Shouldn't you guys be past the point of uniting your parties at this point? Go ahead, there, Brian.
Well, I don't think, and we'd probably agree on this too. If you look at the polling in terms of where it is for November, Joe Biden got less than 90% of the vote because of the uninstructed and the other issues when he was on the ballot for the April primary. And kind of to Ben's point, we're a state of about 6 million people. We've had 12 races in the last 24 years that have been decided by less than 30,000 votes. I mean, think about that, statistically, right? I always say Wisconsin's not one of 50 states this year. We're one of 5. You can say 6, 7, whatever that number is. But
maybe 3.
Yeah, maybe 3 is more like it, or even 2. It really gets down to a handful of states. But what we see in the numbers, number one, is that our people are overwhelmingly together behind Donald Trump. That part of it is working very, very well for us. Number two, this isn't your typical, think about it historically too, but just out of common sense, this isn't your typical incumbent challenger race, right? The voters know both of these folks, and so they're approaching it a different way than they usually would. The problem for Joe Biden is the things that they don't like about Joe Biden aren't going to change. He's actually driving them in worse than he did before. For people who say, oh, maybe Donald Trump has a problem with certain sets of voters, they're not voting against. Donald Trump didn't lose 4 years ago because of his record. There may have been other issues, discomfort with Donald Trump or whatever. Joe Biden is going to lose because of his record. Because now people have 4 years of Trump's record versus 4 years of Joe Biden's record to compare to, and it does not work for Joe Biden.
Okay, start with the uninstructed, and then
Sure.
and then go on to rebut. Hey, Brian, when you.
So I hear everything you're saying, and it would be more compelling if the division in the Republican primary were not markedly bigger than the division within the Democratic primary. There were 124,000 Wisconsinites who didn't cast a protest vote about a Trump policy. They voted against Donald Trump in the primary. And you can see in surveys of Nikki Haley voters, a ton of those voters will not vote for Trump in the fall. On the Democratic side, there was the uninstructed movement. And this was an effort by voters who voted in the Democratic primary to send a message about a specific policy issue, disagreements about Gaza and the hope that the conflict will end and that there will be a just, enduring peace. And frankly, President Biden is working for a just and enduring peace, security, safety, self-determination for Israelis and Palestinians alike. His success on exactly what he's working to do can help to bring together folks who are concerned about that. So President Biden has a path to win uninstructed voters and non-voters and Nikki Haley voters, whereas Trump is talking about purging the Nikki Haley supporters. He's pushing them out. It's easy to unite a party if you purge everyone who disagrees with you from that party. At this moment, the Democratic Party is a big tent. We believe that everyone should have the freedom to make their own decisions about their own bodies and that voters should get to choose who leads the country. And at this moment, Trump is talking about a massive purge of civil servants in the federal government if they don't swear fealty to him as the dictator on day one. That is so repellent to so many people. Even if they agree with Republicans on most things, we're not a monarchy in this country. And this really is an elemental decision that we face as a country this November. And it's one that President Biden feels to his core. You could see in the State of the Union address the kind of fire and energy that after a moment when people were kind of, getting the jitters, Democrats calmed down and got focused because the magnitude of the stakes in this election are so enormous. And the contrast between the vision of a democracy for everyone or a kind of Trumpian nightmare where you're either with him or against him, and most of the country's not with him, that's a choice that I'm confident the American people will be able, and the Wisconsin people will be able to decide in the great spirit of Wisconsin's forward tradition.
Okay, so you guys agree that Wisconsin is the center of the political universe, right? Everybody here does because we're homers, all right? Yes, but and then there's going to be a sliver of the electorate in Wisconsin that's really going to decide the election. Can you define? I think you guys have been, batting it around a little bit, but who are exactly these voters that are going to be targeted? There's going to be tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars maybe spent in Wisconsin alone. Define that voter. The voter that's really going to decide this election.
I'll take a first pass at this. When you just look at the margin of victory, you might think not much changed from 2016 to 2020. Because in 2016, Trump won by 22,748 votes, and in 2020, Biden won by 20,682. Not a lot of people. But look under the hood, and hundreds of thousands more people voted in 2020 than had in 2016. And a couple 100,000 people who voted in 2016 didn't in 2020. There was change in the electorate, significant change under the hood. Trump turned out more voters in every single county in 2020 than he did in 2016. Biden turned out more voters in every single county than he did in 2016. And so when I think about this, there are some voters who are undecided right now. There are some voters who are thinking, about third parties right now. There are some voters trying to decide whether to vote. And I actually think it's an all of the above kind of the election. We're going to have to make sure that we're present and organizing, talking to people, making our case. I'm sure both parties will. In every zip code in this state, across generation, geography, gender, race, and ethnicity, in Spanish and English and Hmong, we're going to have to show up everywhere. Democrats are organizing in some of the reddest, most rural parts of Wisconsin and finding Democrats who they didn't know were there, putting yard signs in their yards. And I know the Republicans will be doing the same. So even though there are some groups that are shifting more than others, I actually think whichever party neglects any part of the state is going to lose in November, and it won't be the Democrats.
We agreed till right there. So the old shorthand, right, was Milwaukee, the collar counties, right, western Wisconsin, north of Highway 29, right? All of us, that was our old shorthand. And so it is a lot different. As I talk to folks across the state, look, when I started in this business, north of Highway 29, we had like 2 Republicans representing any of that area in the state Senate or in the state Assembly. Western Wisconsin, by far, dominated by Democrats in the legislature. That has changed completely. People talk about the collar counties around Milwaukee a lot, where we will do better this time. We look at Kenosha County, that we flipped to a Republican county executive, and this past April 2nd, we knocked off a Democrat mayor in Wausau, who was one of their rising stars, and flipped 7 county boards around the state. So where we see our opportunity to grow, and I agree, in fact, my message to Republicans across the state is about growing the voter base, which we both need to do, but about growing the voter base. And whenever I talk to crowds, I'm always like, people, how many of you know that person who thinks like, to Republican crowds, who thinks like us, acts like us, lives like us, believes like us, but never vote? And whenever I ask that question with crowds, every hand goes up, because we all know those people, right? We have hundreds of thousands of those people out there, literally, of those people out there who haven't voted before, which sounds really strange to everybody here in the room, right? That people haven't voted before. There are hundreds of thousands of them out there. We know where they are, and we're going to go get them. Another change that we've made since I've been chairman is I believe in going under the elections law we got on the books. Not the ones I wish were on the books, not whether I like early vote, not whether I like ballot harvesting, not like, as state chairman, it would be malpractice for me not to use every potential advantage we have on the books. And you look at where Republicans won congressional races or picked up a few extra seats in California, in Florida is where they used ballot harvesting, where it's legal, it's in the statutes. And I guarantee you there will be no tool out there, not only in my desire to turn out the base, but to get to those new voters all across all 72 counties. It's not as much a regional thing anymore. It is and it isn't. But I guarantee you we are not going to sit back and allow another party to take advantage of things that are legal and on the books. We aren't doing that. We're going for the win.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you're not going to stick with Trump, who is against absentee balloting.
He was
speaking to your mic.
He was talking favorably about early vote the other day.
Okay, so he's found the religion on that.
You need to check in with him, Jeff.
Okay. He's busy during the day. In New York, it's hard to reach him.
I will just say on this note, first of all, I hope Democrats are listening, because Democrats have had this advantage where we try to make it easy for people to vote and vote in whatever way is most convenient for folks. The Republican strategy has been to make sure that Republican voters did not cast absentee in early ballots and then try to throw those ballots out after the election. That's what we saw in 2020. That was the whole plan, an attempt to disqualify hundreds of thousands of legally cast ballots that came within one vote on our state Supreme Court of succeeding. So I would much rather live in a world where Republicans are competing to get the most votes instead of trying to get a certain kind of vote and then throw all the other votes away. I think that's an improvement for our democracy. I hope that your presidential nominee sticks to that plan.
You won't be saying that the day after the election.
Okay, so how much money is going to be spent in Wisconsin? All sources, all combined. How much campaign money is going to be? We've had lots so far. But in this cycle, what's going to be the final number, do you think?
Hundreds of millions of dollars. I think I probably wouldn't go above that, but that's a lot of
Well, like how many hundreds of millions? Like, 250 million or
Hundreds of millions.
Yeah,
like okay, so what? Take a wild guess. 500 million. Is that out of the question?
What, do you have a bet on this? Or
No. What's your over or under on it? What's your over or under on 5? Maybe.
It's obviously going to be a lot of money, but think about what's driving it this year too.
Okay.
You have a president. I mean, think also kind of historically. You have a presidential race that's close. I think we would all agree that it's close. You have a U.S. Senate race that 5 months ago, I couldn't talk reporters into believing was going to be a U.S. Senate race. There was this Baldwin bias of, oh, you can't beat Tammy Baldwin. I'd hear it from state reporters, from national reporters. She's just too strong. There's no way she can lose. First poll, she's only up by 7. Second poll, she's only up by 3.5. Last poll, even to 3, all within 6 weeks. 6 weeks. So whatever Baldwin bias people might have out there about that being a non-competitive race, it's obviously competitive. So that ought to be put off to the side. So you got president, right, U.S. Senate, 2 congressional seats that'll be active, and then a new map for the legislature, which is something, from a finance perspective that, right, people don't necessarily see. But that will be very expensive. It's essentially reapportionment 2.0. So it's going to be expensive this time at all levels, I think.
All right, talk about the Senate race.
So I agree with all the points about how many things are happening on the ballot. And it means that some voters in Wisconsin will cast a ballot that could determine the assembly majority, that could move us towards Democrats towards flipping the Senate majority, that could flip a House seat, and that could hold the Senate majority for Democrats and prevent MAGA Republican leader to be determined from taking over for Mitch McConnell, and define the presidential election. Those are some of the most powerful ballots in the history of American democracy. This year is a special year in that sense because the stakes are so big at every single level. And that'll drive spending, that'll drive volunteer activity everywhere. I think it'll drive up turnout. And I think it'll drive up turnout in ways that move across races. So you're going to have people who are motivated to throw out Robin Vos who then go out and vote for President Biden. And maybe that happens on the reverse, but I can't speak to that. The thing that I'm so interested in is in all these races, they're truly toss-ups. And I think the Senate race is a good example of this. I had the same problem because I have been telling people that Tammy Baldwin is a fantastic senator. She is a dynamite campaigner, and Wisconsin is Wisconsin. This is a state where both sides, if you run a serious campaign, you start at 48% of the vote. And that means that we should treat the Senate race as a toss-up until proven otherwise. And the polling is now coming to reflect. Republicans are discovering that they have a Republican nominee, and their default is to support the Republican nominee until they find out what the Republican nominee thinks of them, which has been fascinating to discover as he's described how seniors in nursing homes are not in a condition to vote because of mental capacity, and how young people have not been taught a work ethic, and how people who struggle with their weight should pay more for their health insurance, and how farmers don't do hard labor anymore and just drive around on tractors, so their retirement age should go up to 72. I mean, he doesn't seem to like Wisconsinites, but Wisconsinites don't know that yet. So right now it's looking very competitive, and I think it's going to take a lot to make sure people find out who Eric Hovde is and are reminded what Tammy Baldwin has done to make sure they can afford their medicine, to bring jobs to Wisconsin, Buy America policies, and stick up for everyone in the state.
So I think you have to. Are you going to defend Hovde now? He's going to be your. You're
going
to endorse him at your party convention.
Yeah. You shouldn't drink before lunch.
Eric Hovde wants to ban the private sale of alcohol to the public, so he can do something about that.
These are the people who dropped over $100 million to beat Ron Johnson and lost, okay? They dropped $100 million, most of it from outside the state, against Ron Johnson, who they thought would be a sure loser. So Tammy Baldwin was only a 37% favorable. I think that was in the Marquette poll, if I'm not mistaken, when she got into this race. And by the way, I believe it was that same Marquette poll, Joe Biden only had 37% of Democrats saying that he ought to be their nominee. And he's the sitting president of that party. So you have Tammy Baldwin, who's got a 95.5% voting record, with one of the most unpopular presidential incumbents ever to be on the ballot in this state. Tammy Baldwin owns Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's going to own Tammy Baldwin in this race. So what's really going to be discovered is how what Tammy Baldwin has put out there, what she's about, how that on her voting record is not what she's about. For her to collapse that quickly in the polling, literally less than 6 weeks, is, I think, the only Senate race in the country that I'm aware of where a sitting 12-year incumbent absolutely fell flat in less than 2 months, and they're trying to cast it as an advantage. If that's an advantage, the Democrats are in a lot of trouble in this state.
I'd encourage Republicans to take the Senate race for granted. You've got it in the bag. Do not worry about it. Smooth sailing from here on out for the GOP in Wisconsin. The reality is,
They said that about Ron Johnson, as I recall, but anyway.
we're an evenly divided state. That Senate race, you know, there's a couple, the biggest Republican donors in the country, Dick and Liz Uihlein, they and Diane Hendricks put $29 million in to defeat Mandela Barnes in the Senate race, and they won by 26,000 votes. It's the closest any Democrat came to defeating an incumbent Republican in the 2022 election. But you won fair and square. Other than the voter suppression that Bob Spindell celebrated after the election, there's a famous memo about the well-thought-out, multifaceted plan to reduce voting in disproportionately black and Hispanic areas. But other than that, it was a win for the GOP, and I'm sure that they will be back in this election cycle. There will be an enormous effort to try to topple Tammy Baldwin because she has stood up to special interests over and over and over. She wrote the bill to bring down the cost of insulin to $35 a month. That cost some powerful people a lot of money. She has insisted on supporting unions in our state, which some people want to crush, and nationally. She is the author of the Women's Health Protection Act. And there are some people that want a national abortion ban. They want statewide abortion bans. If the Women's Health Protection Act passes, there will not be state abortion bans in Wisconsin or anywhere else. So she's going to be up against an enormous onslaught that's already begun. And Eric Hovde just wrote himself an $8 million check in the last reporting period. He's talking about spending tens of millions of dollars of his own money. So I think everyone should view the Senate race as a toss-up. I also think the more people know about Eric Hovde and the more they know about Tammy Baldwin, the better Tammy Baldwin's going to do. And that is what, as the Democratic Party, our job is to spread the word so we have an informed electorate that is ready to make a good decision.
I remember how offended. Does everyone remember how offended the state Democratic Party was when Herb Kohl wrote himself tens of millions of dollars in checks to run his campaign? I don't remember that news release for some reason. Now, here's Tammy Baldwin, who was it in the Milwaukee Journal or the Post, has had dozens of her staffers trafficking back and forth between K Street, which is where all the lobbyists are in D.C., for those who know, and pumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into her campaign from their posts formerly on her staff and then out onto K Street. I don't think when the finance reports come in that Tammy's going to have a very good story to talk about special interests. And that is a story that will evidence itself in a very big way.
So you guys don't really need me here, do you? You could just... Anyway, I'll just throw out like a phrase or two, and then you guys can... Top issues.
Top issues.
Yeah, there you go.
Freedom, I would put at the top of the list. And when I say freedom, I mean the freedom to access health care and a safe and legal abortion in Wisconsin and nationally, and contraception and IVF. I mean the freedom to marry the person you love and be the person that you are, to read the books that you want to read, the freedom to live in a democracy where your vote gets to determine who becomes the president of the United States instead of an attempted coup. The freedom to retire with dignity and have a family-supporting job, and the freedom to form a union in your workplace if the majority of employees want to do that. These are issues that most Americans agree on. They're pretty simple, and they are all of those issues are enormous winners for Democrats in this election. I'd love to get to a point where freedom's not on the ballot this way and we're arguing about marginal tax rates, but that's not where we are at this moment. we are arguing about marginal tax rates for those at the top, but we're also arguing about something more primal and basic that really affects all of us, the kind of lives that our children will lead, what it is to grow up in the United States of America. And that's one reason why we're seeing such incredible engagement from the grassroots, and when people are having conversations at doors, even people who disagree with Democrats about a lot of things don't want the government telling them and their family what they can do in their personal lives. And that's an argument Republicans used to make. Now it's Democrats making that argument. And it's one reason why I feel like a tremendous sense both of urgency and of confidence as we go into the election this fall.
Well, I was thinking about your comment before about the President's State of the Union, which I also found very thrilling and riveting. That's the effect that this guy is having on this country right now. Joe Biden has had 4 years, almost 4 years, to make the case. On every major issue that moves independent voters in this state and in this country, the Democrats are losing. They have to divert attention away. I mean, just think about the common sense of this. They have to divert the attention away from the common sense issues that people face every single day. I think about what Ron Klain, the President's first chief of staff, said when we were talking about gas prices, and Ron said something to the effect of, the problem for Joe Biden with gas prices, it is the one price of everything that, probably most of us buy, that we get reminded of the price several times a day, because you just, you run around and see it, right? On gas prices, on the grocery store, now on the GDP, this morning's report on the GDP, the third month in a row of inflation. We've had over 3% inflation in the Biden economy every month he's been president of the United States, and it was under 3% almost every month that Donald Trump was president. On the kitchen table issues that people, not in the Madison Club, but out on the streets of Wisconsin, care about, Joe Biden's upside down. And that's not Brian Schimming, Republican state chairman, talking. That's every single poll that you see out there in the state or nationally. So for all of the talk about how Joe Biden cares about, I mean, they almost pretend as though he's not the incumbent. He is the incumbent. And people have made, at whatever level, right, judgments about what they think about both candidates. And it's something working for us, and it's not just working for us in Wisconsin, it's across all 7 targeted states. The same set of issues, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are upside down in all of them.
Okay, so you guys, you need to respond?
I wouldn't mind responding. Thank you. We agree that everyone hates high gas prices and high grocery prices. There's no question about that. It's a political reality. And that's why in 2022, Republicans were sure that they were going to sweep the entire country. Because even though the United States has been more successful than the other G7 countries in bringing down inflation, prices are still higher, and it's infuriating. And so Republicans predicted a red wave. They were getting ready to run a massive celebration. And then, for the first time since 1962, with a Democratic president in the White House, Wisconsinites re-elected a Democratic governor. And in all these races across the battleground states, Democrats overperformed. And when you ask voters why that was, there was one person in a focus group who said prices go up and down, but if you lose your freedom, that's forever. So we've seen this movie. Now, look, it's also the case that there are some voters who think a lot of this stuff about democracy is noise. Maybe they're fed up with the system as it is. They already think our democracy is messed up. They're voting on their pocketbooks. What they want to know is who's going to fight for them, who's going to fight to bring down costs. And elections are ultimately about the future rather than the past. So when you talk to these voters, they're frustrated with the economy. They're frustrated with the prices. But if you ask them who's more likely to fight for you, to bring down costs, to take on special interests, to support working people, Biden actually gains ground on that question. People have seen what Trump did in office, which is a tax cut for the wealthiest people and the biggest corporations. And they've seen Biden walking the picket line. So I do think we have an economic argument in this election that is compelling to working folks in this state, which last I checked are a significant majority. And at the same time, there are other issues that sit right alongside the kitchen table issues that also make a huge difference for a ton of voters in 22, in 23. We'll see it again in 24.
So the problem that they actually have is those working people they love to talk about have turned against them on those issues. In 2022, had the governor's race, right? Ron Johnson gets reelected. The Republicans pick up a congressional seat in western Wisconsin they haven't held in 26 years. Overwhelming majorities in the legislature, sweeping a lot of local offices as well. So I can't speak to other states, state by state, but what I know is in Wisconsin, and interestingly enough, the state treasurer's race, which ordinarily you wouldn't think is a big, high-profile race, right? The Republicans win the state treasurer's race in Wisconsin by 40,000 votes. And the importance of that, by the way, is not between the two candidates, because nobody really, right, knew either of the candidates. It's that when voters went to the polls and voted what their gut was and how they felt going into the polling booth, the Republican won. So I think as I look at 2024, the other thing is you saw so when Biden's numbers started to turn, remember a lot of it was around Afghanistan and foreign policy, which I think our campuses right now are a microcosm of what people think about Joe Biden on foreign policy, number one. Number two, we're 2 years hence, and people have had the full 4 years of Joe Biden to judge now. Remember, Bidenomics, that was the hot term a couple of months ago. It is not working for this administration right now because of the inflation numbers, the grocery store, gas prices, now the horrid GDP report this morning. Interest rates, I mean, we all kind of talk about it in the abstract here, but I'm telling you, you go to the grocery store, you go to the convenience store, the Democrats essentially have to go to voters in this state and in this country and say, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe all that. We know you're paying more in almost every imaginable category. Don't believe all that. Things are improving. They don't believe it.
All right, let's go to some questions from the audience. Raise your hand, and then I'll call on you and shout it out. Go ahead.
So, I came when I took off of work, and we only got here in flannel shirts.
No, there's another one back there, but I'm glad to. Yeah, go ahead, flannel shirts unite.
I will say, I think both of us are elected to our positions. You can join, I hope you do, the Democratic Party right now. We created a pay whatever you please option, so shouldn't be an economic barrier for anyone in the state to join the party. You elect your county chairs. You elect delegates to the state convention, and the state convention chooses the chair. I've won 3 elections to state party chair, and that's eligible for any Wisconsinite 14 years or older, and eligible voters all over the state. So there are a lot of different pieces on the books. I'll be curious about what WEC says about the specific piece that you point to. But we are a party that is open. It's a Big Tent party, and there are people constantly who challenge, who run against existing county chairs and become chair. I ran for state chair in a contested election with the first vice chair of the party and was elected state chair. And I think it's good for state parties, on both sides of the aisle to welcome new ideas and fresh blood and have those conversations even when they're tough. Sometimes they're a little tougher on the Republican side at the moment, as we've seen from their last state convention where they didn't endorse a governor's candidate. But it's healthy for democracy to have dissent and have debate. So I appreciate the spirit of your advocacy, and I hope that people do get involved. Yeah, I mean, I will say that the
Okay. No. I mean, let's get their answers, and then we can take it up a little bit later. But no, I mean, I want to hear more about it too. But okay, Brian, what about your answer to his complaint before the Elections Commission?
Well, first of all, depending on how Ben does in November, I might vote for him for Democratic Party chairman. So I may want him to continue.
Saying you'll switch parties. Great to hear.
When you come to ours, I'll
stick with the winner.
But I say, in fact, this is kind of a corollary to what I was saying before. I've been traveling the state. I know a lot of people in this room have been traveling the state for 35 years or more, doing legislative. We recruited 5,500 volunteers last November to be poll workers in this state. We utilized 1,000 of them in April, both new records, I believe, both new records for involvement. So for me, traveling all 72 counties, as we both do, traveling the whole state, as we both do, I believe in a growth party. I believe in bringing people in. I'm the Republican state chairman. I feel strongly on certain issues, as we all do on certain things, but I'm a Republican first, and I'm not afraid to say it. So, my approach has always been bring as many new people in as we can, and we are seeing it, I'll tell you what, with younger voters, with Hispanic voters, with African American voters. Our numbers, partially thanks to President Trump, are growing in all of those categories. So I'm looking forward to a growth year.
Okay, so let's just, since we're on this, when is your state party convention and where, and can anybody come? And then Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, our state party convention's June 8th to 9th at the Potawatomi in Milwaukee. You can register on the WisDems.org website right now. If you want to be a delegate who can vote on the party platform and other things, then get involved in your county party and you can become a delegate from your county. But I hope everyone here will.
And he'll have a speaking slot at the convention, I'm sure.
There's a whole process around the speaking
okay.
program. Appreciate that.
All right, but anyway, you guys should talk afterwards. Well, go ahead.
And we're
When's
May
your-
17th up in the valley,
Yeah.
in Appleton, where I just was over the weekend. You go to WisGOP.org, and it's an exciting year. Well, it's an exciting year for us, too, because we have the Republican National Convention, and we're bringing almost 50,000 people to Milwaukee. So in some ways, our Appleton convention will be a little bit of a preview of what you will see in July. And the RNC convention is the week of the 15th of July in Milwaukee at the Fiserv.
Right, and you have a fight for national committeemen because Tom Schreibel is leaving.
Right.
We have one of the candidates here today, former state GOP chair, Brad Courtney.
Yeah,
We're
Brad
not
Courtney
endorsing
is
him, but
here.
he's here. I don't know where the... But anyway, so you'll have do you have any fights over leadership at your party?
It looks like we're going to have contested elections for DNC spots. Janet Bewley is retiring her seat on the Democratic National Committee, and there's multiple folks who've now filed. So it should be an interesting moment, and it'll be an election.
Okay. Go ahead, Ron.
I was hoping we could talk about the cabinet and the extent to which we might focus on defense, state, and finance. And I guess I'd like each of you to talk for a minute about, so how was Biden this past
On what issues? On what cabinet issues?
Cabinet people are state, finance, and defense. Those are the three most important to me and many of us.
Okay, so what would a Trump second term look like in terms of foreign relations?
Well, as a lot of folks in here know,
My question is also, how well did he do it in the first time?
Okay, go ahead.
so Trump, I think, as most folks in here probably would know or guess, is not much of an internationalist. We didn't have these kind of wars, to be blunt, under Donald Trump that we've got under Joe Biden. And right now we have foreign policy crises on every hand under this administration, and the people out there know it. I mean, the President Biden, as I say, his polling kind of cracked after the failed Afghanistan withdrawal. But you look on every hand right now, and this president has us in disasters overseas. And people get that, by the way. I mean, a lot of times folks don't look at foreign policy issues as everyday issues, right? Or they're, they kind of watch them from afar, but they don't. But this president's incompetence in foreign policy has us in I can't tell you about cabinet appointments, so I wish I could. But on Afghanistan, in the Middle East, with Russia, everywhere you look on major foreign policy disasters, and Joe Biden's in the middle of them. So if you like what's going on right now in the foreign policy arena, vote for Joe Biden, because you'll get more of it, because you have a weak president in the Oval Office right now, even almost separate of individual issues. You have a weak president who the former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, referred to as being wrong on every major foreign policy issue in the last 40 years. And so we're taking that 40 years of experience with Joe Biden and has now projected through this term. So if you like what you're seeing in foreign policy right now, you're going to love the second 4 years of Joe Biden.
When I look at the crises around the world, and there are crises, and some of them are frightening crises, I'm so glad that Joe Biden is president instead of Donald Trump. If you look at Ukraine, if you want Russian tanks to roll through Kiev, then by all means vote for Donald Trump. I think territorial aggression is not something the international community should encourage. If you think it's important to bolster and strengthen and expand NATO, then Joe Biden's your guy. You can see this with his diplomacy. Trump alienated and threatened to break up NATO. He was constantly being pulled back by his own cabinet secretaries, who, one after another, have now come out and publicly denounced him, said that he was a disaster, had no idea what was happening. The U.S. Secretary of State was clearly seen as not actually representing the president's views, was essentially inert, and was living in total isolation in the State Department. And as a result, our alliances were freaked out that we wouldn't be there for them. Our adversaries, especially starting with Russia and Putin, became more and more emboldened to move towards the acts of aggression that we've now seen come to pass. And we can see right now with Congress, there's a bipartisan majority that thinks that we should actually stand with our allies. And Trump is not part of that majority. Trump is threatening a total withdrawal of the United States from our historic alliances and our commitment to having a rules-based international order where we try to prevent and, if necessary, repel territorial aggression and the kinds of things that have led to the greatest disasters in foreign policy history around the world. This is a complicated time. Having a president who actually understands how complicated the world is, rather than sucking up to foreign tyrants based on how much they flatter him when they're in public, even if they're laughing at him in private, that is really the contrast in this moment. And for the voters that do pay attention to foreign policy, I think this is pretty clear. There are some hardcore isolationists who think that we should not be supporting Europe and Ukraine, for example, at this moment, who think we should be withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, who think we should not be participating in nuclear non-proliferation regimes. There are those America First isolationist voters, and they will vote for Trump. For everyone else, the contrast on foreign policy is especially clear and urgent, especially in this moment of conflict.
I would say, with respect to the NATO reference, thanks to Donald Trump, NATO stepped up and had to start paying the bill for national defense in Europe. Remember what happened there? It wasn't about being the favorite guy at the dinner party. It was about getting billions of dollars that U.S. taxpayers were having to pick up for defense in Europe that the European democracies, and some of them not democracies, were forced to pick up. Even former Obama officials agreed on that. Under Donald Trump, again, not an internationalist, right? Under Donald Trump, you didn't have those wars. Under Joe Biden, you've got wars everywhere that are not just costing people money, they're costing American lives and the lives of our allies. And the people out there get it.
Yeah, so I'm with ARP. We've got about 1 million members in Wisconsin, about 40 million across the country. Our members are telling us when we go across the state and across the country that some of the less sexy issues are important to them. Support for family caregivers, stronger internet service, broadband, prescription drugs, health care. A lot of the issues that aren't necessarily being talked about because they're not surfacing yet. Are your candidates in line with that? Do they know what's on the minds of older Wisconsinites, and what are their policies to try to provide as much support as possible so that we don't keep losing folks who want to leave Wisconsin because there's stronger internet in neighboring states, so there's better health care? What are you doing? Are your candidates in tune with that, and what are they doing to help them?
I so appreciate this question. And I think, unfortunately, this is an issue where there's a real contrast between the parties at this moment. Although I don't think if you ask voters, I don't think there has to be such a contrast. President Biden, with nationally bipartisan votes, in Wisconsin, only Democratic votes, passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, passed the American Rescue Plan, and worked with Governor Evers and the Evers administration to dramatically expand broadband access across Wisconsin. They're on their way to reaching, they've already reached, I think, 350,000 additional Wisconsin households, and that number is going up and up and up. President Biden, with support from Democrats, passed the bill that allowed Medicare to start negotiating drug costs and bring them down. This is used to be a bipartisan thing to make sure that seniors had access to prescription drugs, but when Republicans passed the law, they forbade Medicare from negotiating. And so the cost of prescription drugs has been so high. President Biden, Tammy Baldwin actually wrote the position. President Biden signed it into law. Those prices are starting to come down, and that is an urgent crisis that a lot of seniors are infuriated about. At an even deeper level, this question of whether Social Security and Medicare should be expanded and strengthened or whether they should be cut and whether retirement ages should be raised, that's a real contrast between every single budget that President Trump introduced when he was president and what President Biden has fought for at every step of the way, what Eric Hovde has proposed and what Tammy Baldwin stands for. And this last piece around nursing homes and caregivers, Kamala Harris was just here and gave her speech outlining the vision for the care economy, for supporting domestic care workers, for making sure that there are enough of them in nursing home facilities and that they have a supportive wage so that the turnover goes down. There is absolutely a workforce shortage, and we have to make these sustainable jobs so that we can care for an aging population. And this is something that's been central to President Biden's vision and is something that both Democrats and the broad majority of the public really supports. It was shot down by Republicans in the United States Senate when we had a Democratic House, and the Republican House hasn't lifted a finger to address this looming crisis. So it's something that there's an opportunity for progress on, and we need to do it. The clock is ticking, and if we elect President Trump, we're going to start winding the clock backwards instead of actually moving forward.
Of course, the Democrats have to do this. Does anyone remember the old Paul Ryan ad where he's pushing a person in a wheelchair off a cliff? That's the, with all due respect to my colleague here, that's the strategy they have to use against Donald Trump, who, when I was with him in Green Bay 2 weeks ago, specifically talked about protecting Medicare and protecting Social Security. So part of the reason they have to focus on issues, frankly, to scare seniors, I say this having a 93-year-old mother, to scare seniors is because that's their only way to win. Their only way to win is to make people as uncomfortable as they can be with Donald Trump. Because when you compare records, not just on some issues, but on almost all issues, Joe Biden loses. He loses on almost every major issue facing the country. And so that's why I was intrigued, and President Trump dealt with this, actually, when we were at the Green Bay event. But they can't allow seniors out there to hear what President Trump says on Medicare, on Social Security, because if seniors understand where he really is versus where all the hundreds of millions of dollars of TV ads that we'll get from the other side show there he is, they lose. So they have to demagogue those issues, but that's not new. They do it every 2 years, and whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, everybody in this room knows it.
Do you have your mother's vote? Is your mother on your side?
I'm not on the ballot.
Okay, all right, that's okay. All right, last question here. Go ahead.
We've talked a lot about presidential politics, but I'm interested in your perspective on Wisconsin politics. I think we have moved to a place where we're not really moving forward as a state in public policy. I think Minnesota kicks our butt a lot of times, and I don't know whether you feel that same way or not, but the congeniality that you show at the table doesn't seem to be present in the Capitol. I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Well, I think we have an opportunity in this state because the public's actually united on so many different issues. The public wants change. The public doesn't want Mississippi to lap Wisconsin when it comes to expanding Medicaid. The public doesn't want nursing home facilities to close. They don't want rural hospitals to close. They want investment in roads and bridges. These are all things where there's a chance for progress. Right now, what we see nationally and in Wisconsin is a Republican politics where the number one goal is to stop Democrats from achieving something, as opposed to figuring out common ground. We saw this when Republicans blocked the bipartisan border agreement nationally. We see this in Wisconsin, where Voss has said over and over that he would never consider expanding Medicaid, has killed efforts to try to allow legal marijuana, which would be a boon in lots of different parts of the state. There's a whole range of these different issues. I think that there may be a new era dawning because we now have fair maps. Because for so long, the only thing for most Republican legislators has been the threat of a primary challenge from the right. A third of the Republicans in the caucus got a MAGA primary challenger in the 2022 elections. But now Republicans have to think about the general electorate when they're running for state legislature. And that means that both Democrats and Republicans have an incentive to go where the voters are, which is supposed to be where elected officials spend their time thinking about. And my hope is, I certainly hope Democrats win in the state assembly, get a majority this election cycle. I hope we win a Senate majority over 2 cycles. But I also hope that the Republican Party de-radicalizes and starts actually looking for ways that we can build a win-win. When Republican legislators have to actually think about what they'd say to someone who could vote in either party rather than just a primary voter, that creates the conditions where we could actually find some compromises and have the kinds of bipartisan achievements that have started to move in the last few years, earlier this year and last year with shared revenue and other things. We could see a lot more of that in a state where both sides are legitimately competing for the majority.
So I love hearing my Democrat friends talking about de-radicalizing when they have now become, they're not the president of Harry Truman or JFK or FDR anymore. They're the party of the squad. And the issue survey work there shows it. Somebody else, Joe Biden right now is being the president that Bernie Sanders wished he could have been. That's the kind of the reality that they have to deal with, and that's what you see in the polling now. They've radicalized. I love the issue now for those of us who've been around for a few years and remember fair maps from the last 3 reapportionments. This fair maps thing that they talk about is the group of maps that the Democrats in the legislature voted against. We gave them what they wanted on the maps. They were bargaining to get a better set of maps from the Supreme Court. So we served them their own maps back up. They all voted against the maps that they claimed that they wanted. And then that was bipartisanship, us passing fair maps and sending it to Tony Evers for his signature. So the whole fair map thing is almost comic. I mean, they wasted all that money on those fair maps yard signs you saw all over the state when they turn around voting against them. So I I think we can be in a situation. What will be interesting, as I say, and it kind of gets back to the bigger issue, not just in the state but nationally, is that this whole thing comes through Wisconsin. Everything comes through Wisconsin. Presidential race, a close U.S. Senate race, it looks like, and a couple of congressional seats. We're sitting in the closest majority that we've ever had in the House of Representatives right now. So I cannot underscore enough the importance of Wisconsin voters. It's why we're out pushing bigger turnout. It's why I'm doing things differently than maybe we have in the past, because I want to get those extra voters out the door and let them have that judgment. Wisconsin, the whole country is going to be watching this state. They're watching it already, right? But the whole country is going to be watching Wisconsin. It's historically, it'll be almost unbelievable what all may be affected in one night in Wisconsin.
All right, that's something we can all agree on. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you to our sponsors, Hush Blackwell Strategies, American Family Insurance, XL Energy, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, ARP Wisconsin, Walmart, and thanks to the party chairs. Really appreciate it.
As the state's leading property and casualty insurance trade association, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance plays a crucial role in safeguarding Wisconsinites. Alliance members provide vital insurance coverage, ensuring financial protection for individuals, businesses, and communities across the state. In times of need, they act as a reliable resource, helping residents recover from unforeseen events. Ultimately, the Wisconsin Insurance Alliance and its members contribute to the resilience and well-being of Wisconsin families and businesses by offering essential protection and support. You have been watching a production of Wisconsin Eye, your unfiltered window into legislative deliberations and public policy programming, where our mission is to provide Wisconsinites an opportunity to access the legislative process and connect with conversations that inform our citizenry. Please consider supporting our mission, and thank you for watching. Wisconsin Eye, policy made public.